Hi, I'm Chaplain William Johnson from the Spiritual Care Department here at Christian Hospital for our morning meditation. We're so glad once again to be able to share with you these words of encouragement and inspiration. As always, we want you to know that you are important to us and most importantly, important to the work that you do wherever you are and whatever you're doing in your life. I'm so glad to be able to share today, and I'm especially appreciative of this opportunity to be able to share with you today's message indeed. I want you to know that you are certainly appreciated, you are loved, and you're irreplaceable. And because of that, I'm going to challenge us a bit today as we focus once again on the one life we're given, and also push us a little bit to do some introspective work as we share together today. Today's message is entitled A Late Night Wrestling Match. A late night wrestling match. Every now and then I have some moments to reflect and to remember my life, as many of us do. And I took some moments to reflect on my childhood and remembering Saturday nights, especially, and early Sunday mornings. Back when I was a kid here and growing up here in St. Louis, I would try to do my best to stay up late at night on Saturday nights. That's long before cable television, long before television went on 24 hours in the cycle in which we're in. But back then on Channel 11, KPLR TV, there we would find Wrestling at the Chase, followed by the Three Stooges, comedy act. And so I know we weren't supposed to watch that, but I would sneak in my room and turn on Wrestling at the Chase. And wow, what characters we had back then. Not like today. I'm kind of reminiscing and showing my age. But back then we had Dick the Bruiser and Andre the Giant and Kamala and the Von Erich family and all of those wrestlers. They would wrestle at the Chase Park Plaza, and I would watch them do all kinds of things and get caught up in the drama of the storytelling and the wrestling moves. Well, I discovered that when I watched it at night, if I fell asleep late at night, then it would be back on early in the morning on Sunday morning before I had to go to church. I would have on Wrestling at the Chase. Well, it made me think about wrestling, period, and made me think about the ways in which we find ourselves grappling, a wrestling term, with the challenges of our lives. We are often wrestling with how to raise our children, wrestling with career goals and decisions, wrestling with what decisions we have to make if we're ill or sick, wrestling with financial issues. Many of us wrestle with those things, wrestling with how to be in relationship with one another, wrestling all the time. We find ourselves wrestling, and sometimes we need rest from our wrestling. Well, today I want to share a little message, and I warn you ahead of time, it will kind of dive into a text. As a preacher and minister in this forum, I try not to be sectarian in my approach, but today I'm going to approach this story and unpack this story of Jacob. Somewhere around the 32nd chapter of the book of Genesis, we find this story of Jacob. Jacob is one of Isaac's sons. Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob, and Isaac kind of had favoritism among his boys. They were twin boys, and so Jacob, as they grew older, the story goes on, was kind of slick. His name means slickster or con artist, and it's funny how people name their children after what they thought they might become in life, but there it is in this story. Jacob goes on to be pretty slick, and he cheats his older brother out of his birthright and his blessing, and is sent off into another country in order to save his life before his brother Esau would take his life after his father Isaac would die. And while there, he learns not how to be a better person, but how to be even more slick, a better con artist. He hangs around family members who knows how to cheat each other and cheat other people. And so he learns to master that kind of behavior. But at some point, he decides he wants to go back home. And when he heads back home, on his way, he has these moments. Now he has wives, he has cattle, he has children, he has wealth, and he decides he wants to go back home, but he's afraid of the encounter, the face-to-face with his brother Esau. And while on his way there, he decides that as close as he would get, he wanted to have some time to himself. So he sent all of his family and his servants and his cattle and his children on one side of a ford or a river, and then he went on the other side to be by himself. And while he got there by himself, late that night, someone comes to him and he has a wrestling match. So I want to share with you a little bit of what the scripture says so that as I'm telling this story, you'll understand what I mean. And he rose that night and took his 2 wives. This is verse 22 of chapter 32. His 2 female servants and the 11 sons, his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok and took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had, even his possessions. And then Jacob was left alone, and a man, no name, wrestled with him until the breaking of day. It's one of my favorite stories because he wrestles with this being, not knowing who it is. And it reminds us that sometimes many of us have had moments where we had a lot on our minds. We had meetings the next morning. We had conversations that we dreaded having. We had the doctors coming in to talk with us about the results of a test. We've had moments in our lives in which we felt the anxiety rise as we were faced with reckoning with what was before us. And so did Jacob. And in those moments, sometimes we have to wrestle. So I love this story because he does wrestle. And he wrestles with this being. It says a man, but he wrestles all night long. And when the man decides, comes to the conclusion that he cannot change or win against Jacob, he decides he wants to let go. Now, there's a lot I want to say about that, but I do want to say this. There's some things that we have in our lives that God shows up and wrestles with us. I believe that we wrestle with ourselves. We sometimes wrestle with God. We sometimes wrestle with others. But whatever the case is in this story, for Jacob's sake, he could not change Jacob, so he altered him. That's something to be said. Now, I sound like a preacher. I'm raising my voice. I'm getting excited. But I want you to know that some things that we wrestle with, if we're not willing to change, we will sometimes end up altered. The story says that the man touched Jacob's hip and knocked it out of socket until Jacob was left with nothing but a limp in that leg and from that hip injury. Some of us have been wrestling with things and choices and decisions, and I want to encourage you that sometimes those things are meant to change us. And when they don't change us, sometimes the pressures of life come to alter us so that we will not be able to go on the same way we had. You see, Jacob had always been able to talk himself out of trouble, always been able to be pretty slick and con his way out of anything. And here, there are moments in our lives where whatever we've been doing, however we've been doing it, business as usual will change us. If not change us, it will alter us. I think of our pandemic and the pandemic in which, I don't want to own the pandemic, but the pandemic in which we are facing and how we're living through it. Some of us have been forever changed by it. Others have been altered. In other words, going along with life as business as usual is no longer something we can do. We're in the place where if we are not changed by it, we certainly have been altered by it. And in this story with Jacob, those of you who are reading or have read or will read that, read on through like the 32nd verse, but it will tell the rest of the story. The story goes on, and there you discover that the man he's wrestling with wants to let him go. He says, I'm not going to wrestle with you anymore, and I'm not going to deal with you in this context anymore. I'm not going to try to change you anymore. I'm not going to try to fix you anymore. I'm not going to try to get you to understand anymore. If you want to stay that way, but I'm leaving. Let me go. And Jacob realizes that he can't let him go. The man says to him, whether the man is God, whether the man is Jacob wrestling with himself, whether Jacob is wrestling with the idea of meeting Esau or some other individual, some other person in his life, he cannot let go, even though the day is breaking. Now, as a preacher, I want to say more about this daybreak. It was believed that this is God, then anyone that sees God face to face would die. And so the being says to Jacob, let me go, for the day is breaking, and unless you want to die, you need to let me go. And Jacob's response to that, it says, I will not let you go until you bless me. In other words, the pandemic may be difficult. The divorce may be difficult. The loss of a child may be difficult. The loss of a job may be difficult. But hold on until the thing that hurts you the most blesses you. Because in those moments, you learn some things. You learn about how to love other people. You learn about how to love yourself, and you learn about how to love God. In that moment, Jacob says, I won't let you go until you bless me. And the man asked Jacob, what is your name? Now you remember, I said the name Jacob means trickster, con artist, game player. You add whatever other term or pronoun or whatever it is you want to add in that space. But I believe that's our question. Who are you really? What's really happening with you? What have you been? And when Jacob is able to acknowledge that he's been a trickster, a con artist, whatever you want to put in the blank, when we're able to acknowledge we've not always been at our best, we've not always lived up to what it is that we should be living up to, we've not always been kind, we've not always been good, we've not always treated everyone equally, that we've sometimes treated others one way and treated some others another way, that we've sometimes dealt from the bottom of the deck, that we've not always been fair and equitable in how we treat one another. When we come to that conclusion and we own it for ourselves, we can hear God, we can hear the voice in our spirit, we can hear others look at us and say, now you're no longer Jacob. Your name is Israel in this particular passage, but your name is the one who wrestled with God and prevailed. That's what it means. The one who wrestled with whatever it is you've dealt with and prevailed. Your name is changed. You are changed because of it and for the better. I think you're better. I think I'm better. I think we're better in this life that we're living because we've been changed by the experiences we've had together. We've learned how to do this together, cry together, struggle together, weather the storm together, bind ourselves together. Just a week or so ago, we celebrated and reminded ourselves, and I want to say celebrated, but we were reminded of 9/11, and we were reminded of the devastation that took place then. But since 9/11, we've had this pandemic that has taken out more of us across the board around the world than we could have ever imagined. And it would be heinous, it would be sad for us not to be changed for the better because of it. Yes, I'm encouraging you to have your late night wrestling matches. Who knows? You might just win. Remember, thank you so much. Leave us your messages, remind us, or share with us your feedback, rather, about what you think about these messages. I know sometimes they go longer. I'm trying to perfect it and get better at it. We are praying for you. Pray for us. We are strengthening each other as we journey along. Thank you for indulging me with this story. I try to make it broad, but I think there are some really important things here. So I close with thinking about wrestling once more. I remember whenever watching wrestling, I loved when there were these team wrestling moments. That sometimes when you're wrestling and you're in the ring, you get really tired and really worn out. And every so often, when you are almost at the verge of giving up and being pinned to the mat, if you could just reach out far enough, you might be able to tag in someone, a colleague, a friend, a family member, God, in order to tag out so you can be refreshed and they can continue and help you fight the battle. Well, sometimes we need to tag each other. So I'm encouraging you as you move in your life, whether you're in the hospital, whether you're in your church, whether you're with your family, whether you're in community, tag somebody, tag out. And if you're on the outside and you're feeling pretty good and you're fresh, then look for somebody who's weary and try to stretch out your hand and tag them in and tag yourself in so you can wrestle a while and support them as they journey. Thank you so much for your time. Remember, you're loved, you're appreciated, and you are irreplaceable. We appreciate you. Take care. Until next time.